Quickly, ano ni pamadasan? Is this on? Can you? It's on. Can you hear me in the back? Good. It's good to be here in Vancouver. It's good to be here on Musqueam and Coast Salish land. I want to talk to you about a few things. I want to talk to you about the flotilla, and I have some films that I want to show you, some short film clips, which will bring you close up to what we were doing in June when we attempted to sail through the blockade of Gaza and into Gaza Harbor. I want to talk to you about that because that's something that you can do. And there's actually lots of things you can do, but you know, some people feel that sailing on the Gaza is sort of a quite a difficult process. But I want to assure you that any one of you, absolutely any one of you, could have sailed on that boat with us and taken the challenge that we did. But I also want to talk about Aboriginal people. I want to talk about colonialism for just a moment and the intersections between the way that colonialism is worked out in Canada and the way that it works out in Palestine. My major focus in my research at Queen's University is in re-indigenization from a theoretical perspective as well as a land-based pedagogy, taking people out into the land and helping them understand what it is to be Indigenous. We tell them in our course, we're not going to make Indians out of you. We're not interested in doing that. But what we are interested in doing is helping people understand the indigeneity that we all possess. Let me give you an example of that. All of our emotions, all of those complex emotions that each one of us have used and felt through time, through our lives, all of our intellectual capacity, all of our ability to work through and solve problems and perceive and understand the world we live in, all of that capacity, all of our physical prowess, all of our ability to do the things we can physically, and even our spiritual connection to the unseen, that ability to have that intuition that a creator exists in this world and that this world is a beautiful, beautiful creation. All of that is possessed by each and all of us. And where did that come from? It came to us. We acquired it. It was a gift from the Creator at a time when each and every one of our ancestors lived Indigenous lives. We're equipped to be Indigenous, each and every human being. In fact, we emerged from one of the most Indigenous environments in the world. And my guess is that most children born into this world have an expectation that the world that they're going to be born into is an Indigenous world. But something went askew. We traded our stories for simply raw analysis. And that has separated us, because what has happened is we've emerged into ideological worlds where it's more important that we believe a certain creed rather than understanding the knowledge that's right around us. And that's what an Indigenous community does. Indigenous communities are knowledge-based, and they're located in a particular place, and they're dependent upon local resources, and their whole knowledge systems are built around those that relationship with the land. You know, the title of today's lecture is Stolen Land. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I've always had a little bit of a problem with the idea of stolen land, because you can't steal land. You can dispossess the people who live there. You can capture them. You can enslave them. You can remove them from the land, but you can't change the land. In fact, the land itself refuses to be colonized because it's always working to resist that. And that's something that we can learn. That, like the land, we need to resist. We need to resist colonization. To be warriors in that process, to be actually engaged in that process, we need to be honest with ourselves. And I think this is really important for Aboriginal people today. And I'm going to really use a distinction between what is Aboriginal and what is Indigenous. Many of us who are Aboriginal have an Indigenous heritage. But to be honest with you, we no longer live Indigenous lives. And so, to be honest, we can't call ourselves Indigenous anymore. There's a veil between our ancestors and ourselves. We can speak the language. Some of us can speak the language. Some of us, have been taught a lot about the knowledge and the traditions. And there are a few people left in this country today who actually live Indigenous lives. But for most of us, we've been separated out of that. We've been separated away from that. But to be warriors in a process of decolonization, we have to be involved in self-provisioning, something that Omar talked about, and I think people responded to it. You have to be able to provide for yourselves. You can't wait around for the handouts. You can't look forward to them. So you have to be involved in self-provisioning. And you also have to be involved in self-defense, defending the land and defending what is left of the cultures. And let's not call ourselves nations or a people unless we can birth our own children and bury our own dead. Because that's what it takes to be a nation. Anything less than that, you're a kept people. So what is this resistance in defense of? And I think that's important. I have 3 questions that I'm going to ask you. The first is, are we fighting to restore the past? Do Indigenous people or people of Indigenous heritage today in Canada want to restore the past? Or are we fighting to live indigenously in the present? Do we want to re-indigenize? And that doesn't necessarily mean living like our ancestors, but it means living close to the land, provisioning for ourselves, and defending our own rights and territories. Or is it that we want to choose, and I think this goes to everybody in this room, do we want to follow some sort of utopian ideals into the future in the hopes that at the end of that will be a perfect society? Which one of those is worth for you to defend? I want to come back to colonialism. Colonialism, I'm sure by now, after hearing from Dima and Omar, and probably from your own experiences, you know that colonialism didn't just happen in Canada, even though our Prime Minister would like, or our ex-Prime Minister would like to. Have you guys had a cheer yet? For the ex-Prime Minister. Colonialism is a worldwide scourge. It didn't just happen to us. It drew our ancestors out of their Indigenous relationships with the land, and it placed them into a new relationship of oppression. I'm not telling you something you don't already know. But this is a reality that our ancestors, the Indigenous people of this land, share with people in Vietnam, in Africa, in Egypt, in the Congo, Mexico, Honduras. I can go on and on. I could probably name, if I had time, 1,000 different peoples who represented the diversity, the real potential of humankind, who no longer can express that diversity. Among the most insidious chains that actually bind us in our oppression is the voice that sort of whispers when we hear the sound of somebody else being whipped. Thank God it's not me this time. Keep quiet, turn away. things could get a lot worse. And probably the worst of all, the beast will be satisfied soon. Colonial societies are based on ideological underpinnings rather than emerging naturally from ecological processes. Indigenous societies are ecological. That's important for us to remember. Colonial societies, on the other hand, are utopian enterprises. Be they democratic states or caliphs, there is an existential dilemma in which the colonizer has ceased to belong to anything and therefore needs things to belong to him. Colonial societies begin more often than not in a state of defeat and poverty, initiated by acts of genocide and ethnocide which have previously been perpetrated against them. Europe was once colonized. It was colonized by the Roman Empire. They progress through a long series of isms and so that they can get paid back. The natural course of this trajectory is eventual collapse. Such societies inadvertently create exhaustible inevitabilities rather than achieving the utopian goals which they espouse to affirm their superiority. And they leave in their wake disturbed ground upon which emerging ideologies become the excuse to do it all over again. Colonialism is a complicated structure and process. It has a lot of variety of forms. I want to look at a couple here. For instance, in Canada, we extol the fortunes of the Hudson's Bay Company. Hudson's Bay Company was one of the first corporations to be given the authority to govern territory. It was a case of administrative colonialism. This corporation was given the right to enforce British law, to establish courts, to run its own form of governance through the entire Hudson's Bay territory, which was bigger than all of Europe. A huge territory. That's what we call administrative colonialism. And even though the Hudson's Bay Company, because of the extended supply lines that it was dealing with, was always in debt to the Indian people, never had enough supplies to trade. You know, we learn in school of all of those furs and all of the great things, but we fail to learn in our primary school education that it was the Hudson's Bay Company that was actually in debt. But they were able to create. Yeah, pardon? Okay. Yeah. Is it turned off or on? It's on? Okay. I'll try to talk a little bit closer to it. Yeah. The Hudson's Bay Company actually was able to create its own credit, which is what capitalism does. Now, and through that, it was able to administer the entire territory and literally take it away from the Aboriginal people's productivity and their ability to have their own economy. And today in Canada, we still have administrative colonialism. The Indian Act determines who is an Indian and who is not. Even Section 35. Remember when Section 35 came into the Canadian Constitution in 1982? It recognized and affirmed the rights and title of Aboriginal people in Canada. We cheered. And then we realized that the Canadian government had once again determined who was an Indian and who was not, who was a Métis and who was not, who was an Inuit and who was not. And so administratively, they still control our own identity. Administrative colonialism works in structurally as well. For instance, where road systems and urban planning and checkpoints control mobility and therefore control access to employment, investment, and even cultural expressions. This continues to take place in Palestine. We see this form of administrative colonialism at work both in the occupied territory as well as the Israeli state. On the prairies in Canada, we once had a pass system. Just like in Palestine today, you could not move from one reserve to another without permission from the Indian agent. I think that if the Israeli state has learned something from Canada's colonialism. We are also familiar with settler colonialism in North America. Indigenous populations were surrounded and often overwhelmed by the demands of desperate migrants. Often these migrant settlers had been removed from their own sense of belonging or enticed with promises of the future. Visions of ideological utopias. By and for capital expansion. The land itself had to take on new names. The names had to be changed. Migrant settlers are used as cheap labor. They were used as cheap labor in Canada, in the forest, and in the mines, and on breaking the ground in the prairies. They're also used to hold land aggressively against Indigenous resistance and return. We saw that happen in Canada, and we still see it happening in Northern Ontario and other places around this country, and we also see it happening in Palestine. Although governments like the U.S. and Canada have protested settler colonialism in Palestine, the state of Israel can turn back to Canada, point its finger and say, "And so what are you doing?" No wonder the new government can't object. If you ever have the opportunity to speak to a Canadian politician, ask them this: when was it that colonialism ended? Is there a date that we can celebrate? What I say to you is that until you can get a straight answer, I suggest that the next time we have an Aboriginal Day, it's either a day of mourning or it's a day of resistance. Extractive colonialism is still the rule in Canada as a main source of economic nationalism and the overriding reason for the extinguishment of Indigenous rights and titles. Extractive colonialism is a principal engine of capitalist economies. Capital growth is gained by externalizing the costs of production onto labor, the environment, and indigeneity. Profit is made only through externalizing the costs of production. As long as the colonial society does not experience discomfort when the consequences of such insidious degradation of humanity and environments goes on, as long as it goes unnoticed, they'll do nothing about it. When Israel continues to look more and more like Southern California, no matter how thirsty Palestinians get, no one in Israel is really going to take notice because they're not made uncomfortable. And democracy, and I want to stress this about the claim that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Democracy and colonialism don't walk hand in hand. Israel is affluent because it has exploited the environment, indigenous and imported labor, and the indigenous lives of native Palestinians. I want to talk a little bit about treaty colonialism, because often when we think about treaties, we think it's an alternative to violence. When we think about treaty negotiations, we think about two parties sitting down at a table and working out their differences and seeking reconciliation. Well, that certainly hasn't been my experience. Historical treaties in Canada were all about the acquisition of resources, whether it was the forest or the soil, space to accommodate the importation of cheap dependent labor. Treaties are seen as an alternative to violence sometimes, but they're not. They have and continue to be instruments of desperation. When the plains were colonized by Canada after Confederation, Sir John A. Macdonald looked around the world. He saw the starvation tactics which were being used in India, and he employed those same starvation tactics to clear the plains. The idea of overcoming and dealing with power differentials simply is an impossible task in the present treaty policies. As I said, they continue to be instruments of desperation. Modern treaties, the comprehensive land claim policies, are more about oil and gas and minerals and hydroelectric projects, and they still demand extinguishment of title. My own band has opted out of a comprehensive land claim. The Algonquins of Ontario, made up of about 5 communities, has stayed into that. And when I looked at the statistics the other day, what was being offered in the final agreement, they were offering the government of Canada and Ontario were offering less than 1% of our traditional territory. When I look at this map over here, that's what our territory looks like, but probably with a lot less. And if we don't stand up and defend Palestine, Palestine's going to look like a lot less than it does today, too. So don't put your faith in the treaty system, because in the long run, it is all about not stolen land, but removing people from the land. The seal on the colonial relationship is military occupation, whether it's seen or unseen. Where insurgent resistance boils over, military force is spun as defense and normal, defense of the legitimate. In Israel's occupation of Palestine, defense of the only democracy in the barbaric Middle East. That's the narrative that's spun. In Canada, defense of the rule of law is the narrative that is spun. Do any of you really understand what the rule of law means? It means the colonial law rules. The violence of displacement and poverty are blamed on what appear to be religious or ideological differences, in the same way that Oka and Burnt Church are blamed on cultural grievances. Whether seen or unseen, military oppression is ever present in the lives of the colonized. I understand, pretty clearly that the West maintains a wall of violence in the Middle East and in North Africa in order to protect their own interests. This goes back as far as Napoleon, who initiated a strategy 200 years ago that creating social instability in the Middle East, to divide sects of people, to divide people along sectarian lines, was a way to keep people fighting each other. And so Europe began the institution of this process way back then, around the same time that Canadian colonization reached Ontario. This compelling narrative that keeps the Middle East as a backward place, a barbaric place, rather than looking at the West as the crusading colonizer, is extremely harmful, both to Palestine and to the West, because it locks the West in a position where it cannot change. It becomes absolutely important for the safety of our souls. If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you in Manhattan. The problem with discussing colonialism, and I want to end up here and talk a little bit about the flotilla because I think that's really important to me to talk about, for me to talk about. The problem of discussing colonialism and resistance in the same conversation is that there is no moral high ground. I'm not making a claim. I'm not making a claim as an activist to some higher order of morality when I talk about self-defense and when I talk about the need for resistance and the need to go to the aid of our brothers and sisters no matter where they are in the world. I'm not claiming a moral high ground in that, because that would essentialize my character. And what I do believe is this: self-defense means someone is going to lose ground. Self-defense means someone is going to get hurt. In all likelihood, everyone is going to lose something. But if there is any right left to the oppressed and those who would ally with them, and I'm including you because I think you're here because you want to be allies, it is the right to self-defense, the right to protect our responsibility to re-indigenize ourselves, and to take full advantage of what the Creator has given us to live well and sustainably in this creation. So I want to talk for a few minutes about the flotilla. You meet some really nice people on the flotilla. I never thought that I would ever meet Ellis Walker, but she came up to me, gave me a hug, and said, "I want to take a picture with you." That was great. The next slide here is simply an approach that we use in our community for resistance and protecting our land and self-defense. It's not just about standing on the picket line. It's not just about occupying. It's not just about the resistance camp or even going to jail. It takes some hard research to understand your positions. And to come up with practical and workable strategies. It also means community education. And I'm going to tell you this: it's really easy to sit down here and talk to a crowd of about 100 people. It's a lot harder to sit around your kitchen table and talk to your neighbors about the issues that really affect you and you know are the right issues to talk about. It's much harder to sit down at the lunch counter with your friends and talk to them about these things. But that's where community education starts. And that's where it has its greatest impact, because if you can convince your peer group, if you can convince your neighbors, if you can convince those families that you'll be sitting around the Christmas table with, and those relatives, then you've actually done something. They'll be on your side, and they'll be the next teachers. Legal action is really important. I just want to stress this particular point, is that legal action is essentially important. Legal action is essentially important, and it doesn't mean just showing up in court. It means the whole political spectrum of laws, the legislators and the work that they do, as well as the courts that you're one day going to have to face. Direct action. You know what direct action is. Many of you have taken part in direct action. Direct action is the signature of your cause. What you choose, whether it's an occupation, whether it's a standoff, or whether it's an armed conflict, it is the signature of your cause. And that's what the rest of the world will know you by. So when you choose whatever you choose, make sure you choose it well. A few years ago, after we had been pretty well blocked by a number of Mediterranean countries from leaving their ports, the Canadian boat to Gaza had a great idea. What they said was, let's go to Gaza, let's work with producers there, farmers, and with artisans, and let's work with people in North America and Canada and the United States and some places in Europe even, and let's get people to invest in those businesses. And then let's build a boat. And let's not us build a boat, but we'll employ Palestinians in Gaza to build that boat, and then we're going to fill it with the invested goods, and then we're going to bring it out of Gaza to show that this is not just about breaking a military blockade. This is the main focus is really about restoring economic viability for this population. That's the help that we can do. And so we were able to do some of that organization. Just before we were ready to load, the boat was sabotaged. That wasn't the end of it. We really worked hard. Well, I shouldn't say we worked hard, but our Gazan partners worked really, really hard to get this boat up into dry dock, to get it repaired. It was almost ready to go out into the water again. And in a conflict that took place during the summer of 2014, the Gaza's Ark was shelled from Israeli gunboats outside of the harbor. And the next morning, when the light came up, this was what was left. That didn't stop us. It's still a great idea. There's still artisans and farmers who are willing to take part in this type of opportunity. It needs a group now to organize that and get it going again. This summer, I had the absolute honor of sailing with some of the bravest people that you'd ever want to meet. One of them sitting right there, Kevin Nish. Good, we've got about 7 minutes, and we're going to go over a little bit. We're going to stretch. We're going to resist the university if it comes in here and wants to kick us out. Okay, so this first clip, by the way, these clips were filmed by Jake Bryant, who was a filmmaker, independent filmmaker working for Maori News. Ro Pereira is the voice on these clips, and she was a reporter for Maori News. They were both on the ship. So let me just play you the first clip as an introduction to the flotilla this summer.
I will go from international waters directly to Palestinian waters. So, and that's how I see it. So we are not breaking any rules. It's the Israelis that are breaking it if they are trying to stop us.
The voice you heard was Joel, our captain, a Swedish sailor. Most of the sailors on the boat were Swedish. These guys usually spend about 6 months working at sea, and then they spend the other 6 months in activist activity. Most of them have been in jail in Israel a number of times working for the flotilla.
They're saying they're going to stop us, but this can't go on forever. So, if not this flotilla, next flotilla, or a flotilla after that.
For 68-year-old Canadian activist Kevin Nish, the mission is unfinished business.
That's one of the martyrs that died on the Mavi and wants to breathe his last breath.
He was on the ill-fated Mavi Marmara 5 years ago. These are his photos.
I figured we'd be attacked, be arrested, we'd be thrown in jail. But the mayhem that erupted was beyond anybody's imagination. I was walking at the end amongst all the bodies and wounded people, and I saw two dead people with bullet holes in their heads. Well, that's not an accident. That's not crossfire. That's outright execution. That's what they did.
My job on the Marianne was as nonviolence trainer. I explained to the crew and the other participants on the boat, I'm not a pacifist, but I also recognize the validity and the strength of nonviolence as a tactic, as a strategy. In a case where there's such a strong power differential between an assaulting Israeli force and unarmed people that are carrying aid goods and to bring the ship there to turn it over to the Palestinian or Gaza fishermen. Any sort of any sort of violence on our part would have simply brought about more violence. And so it was really important to train people not to react, not to respond to the violence that might occur during the boarding of the ship. Also, my job was to do a psychological evaluation of each of the sailors and each of the participants to make sure what they could work with and what they couldn't work with, and to also position them in a particular place. And I did this with the captain, with several other people, just talking over where the best place for for people to be. What we needed to do was buy about 90 seconds, so that the films could be taken of the boarding. Films could be taken of any exchanges before the boarding, but we needed about 90 seconds to take the pictures of the boarding and have the photographers to be able to take the chip out of their camera, wrap it in tape, and swallow it. And so our resistance, our nonviolent resistance, had to go at least 90 seconds. Keep in mind that we had also strapped the windows and the bridge doors with metal bars. Kevin and I also went around, was it the night before? Yeah, it was the afternoon before, sawing the metal handles to the latch doors. He's laughing now because he knows what would happen as soon as they turn those latch doors. They'd break off, making it impossible to get into the galley and into the bridge. The Israelis came quite prepared. I'm going to play you just a strip first of our nonviolent training session.
While their quest is to make it to Gaza, they're aware their chances are slim. So every day the activists prepare themselves for an encounter with the Israeli army.
We don't physically go against the soldiers. We don't push.
This could be any one of
we
you.
don't physically attack anyone.
They preach non-violent resistance because they know the risks involved.
Has anyone ever been tasered before? What happens?
Your muscles gives up. You cannot control your body anymore. Then it also depends on what strength they are using, because they can turn this up and down a little bit.
But no matter how prepared, no one expected the vicious attack that happened on the first flotilla, the Mavi Marmara, in 2010.
If you ignore this order and attempt to enter the blockaded area, the Israeli Navy will be forced to take all the necessary measures in order to enforce this blockade.
9 Turkish activists were killed by the Israeli Defense Force, or IDF, who boarded the vessel on international waters in the Med. The International Criminal Court is demanding the case to be reopened and for Israel to be tried for war crimes.
We were within 100 nautical miles of, or just at about 100 nautical miles from Gaza on June 29th. We had decided that we would pull into the major shipping lanes just off the Suez Canal, and we decided that we would be able to be there and still in international waters. That might be the safest place of all to be. We could have chose other places, but that was the place that we chose. The next film shows what happened during the night of that time.
Our mission is to go to Gaza, but even if we are stopped tomorrow or today and we don't enter Gaza, we have succeeded in some way.
(1:30 a.m., Monday, June 29.
You're sending us 2 small white boats. Is that correct?
Yes, over.
I refuse that. I will not allow military assault on my ship on international waters. If you do that, I will see it as act of piracy or act of war. It's up to you to choose.
We got the call up that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, are approaching. We're about 100 nautical miles away from Gaza.
This is the Israeli Coast Guard. Sign over there says ship to Gaza. Ship to Gaza is illegal according to the international law because there is a maritime blockade over Gaza. And you well know that. We agreed to one climbing on the board, unarmed, it will be me, but with one condition that all the others will be at the front of the ship. Is that clear? Once you step your first foot on board this boat, you have committed a crime against international law. We want no violence and no damage, not to the equipment and not to the people that are on board. This is the only way to prevent violence because otherwise we will have to take over the board. If you want, it will be under these conditions. You want to come on this ship, you come on our terms, not on anybody else's terms. If you don't trust us to come here, we are peaceful, then don't come. If you trust us, please come. You are welcome, alone, unarmed, on our boat. We will not harm you, and we let you back to your ship after you said what you have to say. We agree to disagree, and this calls for the other solution, and I apologize for that. It is your responsibility, it was your call, and it was your decision.
After 2 hours back and forth, the soldiers board the Marianne.
Forcing us to storm the boat. All passengers go to the front of the boat.
The Israeli government later reported that using force was unnecessary and described the takeover of the ship as uneventful.
Just one last clip here. This is Joel sort of summing up our whole sort of process.
Practical solidarity from human being to human being. We're bringing a ship that is financed by ordinary people in Sweden to ordinary people in Gaza, to the Palestinian fishermen. I don't see this as a sacrifice. I see this as a privilege to be able to do this. Every eye we open to the situation in Palestine and what Israel is doing in the occupied areas in Gaza, that's success for me.
I guess the last thing I'd say about our trip to Gaza, we were pirated. The boat was taken over by the Israelis. They sailed us against our will to Ashdod, the port of Ashdod. We were taken off and we were put through a series of strip searches, medical exams. They called them medical exams, but they were actually intrusive exams. And then we were taken to the process of interrogation. By that time, we're pretty tired, so I don't think they got much out of us. I think they thought we were rather stupid. We were so tired. But one of the things that took place for me is I was sitting just outside of the interrogation tent, and man walked by a couple of times, and then he stopped. And I had sort of thought this guy is one of the lead interrogators or the lead intelligence officers on the grounds tonight. And so he stopped and he said, "How are you feeling?" In a very nice way. And by the way, they offered us water and oranges and cookies and all sorts of things. And then they would stand back with the camera trying to take our picture. No one ever took anything. That was an agreement, because we knew that would be used against us. This guy said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Well, In view of the fact that I was tasered this morning and our ship has been pirated and that we've been, taken over basically by pirates, I don't feel very good. He said, well, that's too bad. He said, you were tasered? I said, yeah, I was tasered. He said, well, you must have been doing something wrong. And I said, you know what? In a logical world, that would make all the sense in the world. But this is not a logical situation. And what he did then is he leaned forward to me, looked me straight in the eye and said, it's our job to make everything logical. One of the worst things about colonialism is that people are trained to be colonials. People are taught, they're indoctrinated, and they're told that they're completely dependent on that position and that position is right. And sometimes that's our neighbors, sometimes it's our friends. Sometimes it's our students, sometimes it's our colleagues. And that's the first thing that you can do, is you can start with them. You can start talking to them, use examples, use these pictures, use what Omar has said. Do that. Really focus in on changing people's hearts and minds. The other thing is, you can get on the flotilla. You can get on it in lots of ways. We need people to be writers and public relations and public information presenters. We need people that are willing to donate to the flotilla process in all sorts of ways, and we also need people that are willing to get on board and sail with us. So think it over, and contact people here in Vancouver that are heading up the flotilla movement. So thank you very much.